Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the second DC Justice Forum hosted by the DC Council for Court Excellence in partnership with the Office of the DC Auditor. Tonight's topic, I love the title of tonight's topic, What If We Were in Charge? That's always a fun thing to think about. And the topic is imagining a future without a federalized justice system in the District of Columbia. And I think, as most of us know, most of the district's criminal justice system is in fact federal. We have federal courts, we have federal prosecution of felonies, we have Federal Bureau of Prison hosting District of Columbia folks who have been convicted of felonies, and all that entails. So tonight we're going to imagine what if that were different. We have statehood, we take over our own criminal justice system. And I'm delighted to welcome our panelists here tonight. And I'm going to have everyone introduce themselves in just a moment. But we are joined tonight by Chiquisha Robinson, Robert Davis, Walter Smith, John Bowker, and Janine Jackson. And we're all going to be speaking among ourselves very informally about some of these topics. By way of introduction, I'm going to ask each of us to say what it is that brings us here tonight. What is our own expertise in any of these issues? I served on the DC Council from 1995 to 2007, chaired the Council's Committee on the Judiciary, which had oversight for criminal justice policy, as well as the public safety agencies. I also was privileged to serve on the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, which tries to coordinate all the federal and district elements of the criminal justice system, and then served on the Council for Court Excellence Board after I left DC government. So let me turn to our discussants tonight and ask each to introduce themselves. Let me start with you, John.
Oh, thanks, Kathy, and good evening, everybody. My name is John Bowker. I'm a partner at the law firm of Aaron Fox, where I've been for nearly 20 years now, where I lead our government relations practice and also chair our pro bono program. But for 10 years before that, I was chief counsel to Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton and worked with her on the Revitalization Act, which set up most of the system that we're going to be talking about tonight. But I've spent a lot of time since then working on these issues, including most recently serving on the local control committee, chairing that committee with Carl Racine of the Jails and Justice Task Force, looking at many of these issues. I'm also a lifelong proponent of DC statehood and have worked on those issues as well, including serving on an outside legal team that's assisted the mayor with statehood issues, along with my friend Walter Smith, who's also on the panel this evening. Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you. Keisha?
Sure, good evening. Hi, Kathy. Hi, and thank you for joining this call. My name is Chiquisha Robinson, and I have been a public defender in the city on the ground, working on behalf of people for the last 16 years. I've worked in many divisions at the Public Defender Service. I was a trial attorney for many years, representing people in the most serious felonies. I also worked in the parole division, representing people before the United States Parole Commission on revocation hearings. More recently, I've been in our community defender division. I am the deputy chief for the Prisoner and Reentry Legal Services program, which means anyone who is affected by a DC criminal record, whether they are in the DC jail, they're serving a sentence in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, or they are in the community living with the collateral consequences of a DC criminal record. We try to solve those problems for them. I am also the co-chair of the DC Reentry Action Network, which is a coalition of over 30 organizations and growing in the District of Columbia that focus their energy on serving people seeking to successfully reenter and to reintegrate. And I also, with many other contributors, over 100 of them, I just authored the DC Reentry Navigator, a 900-page book from soup to nuts on reentry, which is designed to empower people living with a DC criminal record. And I could put the link for the book in the chat. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Robert, why don't you go next?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Robert Davis, and I'm here to share my expertise. Unfortunately, I did 21 years. Most were in the BOP, but some were in Norton, Virginia. But more recently, after coming home, I was hired by University Legal Services, and I'm now a reentry advocate, just trying to basically support all folks coming home from jail, but particularly those with disabilities. And that's my expertise today. Thank you.
Thank you. Janine.
Good evening, everyone. Hi, I'm Janine Jackson. I'm a partner at Holland and Knight, where I've been for almost 7 years. Prior to that, I worked as the Deputy Chief of Staff to former Mayor Gray, where I was responsible for all federal relations and intergovernmental affairs. The reason why I'm a panelist is because I'm a former committee director for the Committee on Public Safety and the Judiciary. In addition to that, I have worked for 3 elected officials on the DC Council, former at-large council member Phil Mendelson, now chairman of the council, Phil Mendelson, who took over for the Committee on Public Safety and Judiciary after Kathy Patterson. Additionally, I'm a former litigator out of the Office of Corporation Counsel before it was called the Office of Attorney General, where I've represented the District of Columbia. And in addition to that, I clerked on the DC Superior Court, where many of these cases were heard. My former judge, Reggie B. Walton, as many of you know, was probably one of the toughest judges on the DC Superior Court. So I'm super excited about this conversation because there's a lot to be said.
Thank you. Walter.
Hello, everyone. My name is Walter Smith. I am the director of DC Appleseed, which is a nonprofit that works on a number of issues facing the District of Columbia. Before that, I was the Special Deputy Corporation Counsel. Before that, I was a partner at Hogan and Lovells, where I had the privilege of being the pro bono partner at that law firm. And in all of those capacities, I've been very interested in and have worked on efforts to bring greater autonomy, greater democracy to residents of the District of Columbia, which is largely what this issue tonight is all about. Finding ways for the district to take greater control of its own criminal justice system. So I'm very interested to hear from and frankly learn a lot listening to the other folks on this panel. So thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. Let's start with a question I think it'd be great to hear from everybody on. What do you most want changed from your experience, your experience, as a resident, your experience professionally? What do you most want changed in our justice system in terms of DC taking it over? And who would like to jump in?
I mean, Kathy, I can start from the perspective of the Revitalization Act, because this one has kept me up at night for many, many years, which is that when we wrote the Revitalization Act, there was a promise there that folks would be close to home when they were incarcerated. As we all know, that never happened. There are 122 facilities of the Bureau of Prisons. And as far as I can tell, there is at least one DC code offender in each of those facilities. And those facilities are all over the country, which is absolutely outrageous. You're trying to provide an opportunity for folks to keep connections, for folks to be able to come home back into the community smoothly. When I was working on the local control committee of the Jails and Justice Task Force, we had a formerly incarcerated citizen who was part of that committee. And he told a harrowing story, which I suspect is all too common, where when he was released to go back to the District of Columbia from one of these facilities out in the hinterland somewhere, he was given a certain amount of money and shown the door. He went to the bus station and it wasn't enough to buy him a bus ticket to get back to the District of Columbia. So he had to beg from the folks in the bus station to be able to come up with enough money to come home. And that's a travesty. And so for me, I think the thing that we really, really need to get right among all of these things, number one for me, is that issue.
I want to build on what John has just said from the 30,000 feet perspective. As John knows, we have recently been working with a number of pro bono lawyers who are trying to look at what criminal justice system might look like in the city if we had statehood. And we're looking at 3 big areas, all of which are related, but all of which we need to control if we are going to be in charge. One is we need to be in charge of our own courts. Another is we need to be in charge of our own prosecution. And the other is we need to be in charge in the area that John was mostly talking about, and that is in prisons and parole and auxiliary services. All 3 of those fit together, and they need to be looked at, I think, from a unified perspective based on local values and local accountability. And we really don't have any of those 3 right now. And so those are the areas I'd most like to see progress on.
And Janine, I think you started to jump in.
Yeah, so having served for mayor, and in particular, when Mayor Gray was, championing statehood, one of the conversations that we had on the Hill was how much would it cost? And one of the things that I would love to see is the council, the mayor, actually the government plan for assumption of control of the courts, the government plan for the assumption of control of CSOSA, the government actually initiate the planning for all of this, but not only the planning, but the funding for it, because it's a significant cost. And, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I think ideologically, we all agree we should have control, but the rubber meets the road when these things have to be paid for. And I don't feel that there's a true commitment from leadership, elected leadership, to actually plan. There's a heart there, there's a mind there, but it's the pen to paper, CFO get in the room, tell me how much it's going to cost. That's what I would really like to see changed. The government actually initiate the planning of what does it look like and then properly prepare for it.
Is it my turn?
Go ahead.
I have many things I would like. So sit back, put your seatbelt on. Let's get to the nitty gritty. 1, our criminal statute is over 100 years old. It's extremely broad and ill-defined. And the council is currently considering rewriting all of the offenses and penalties, thanks to the work of the Criminal Code Reform Commission. I would like to see those recommendations implemented. To John's point, our people need to be incarcerated locally. They are essentially disappeared into the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and we do not know what happens to our people. We do not have data on how they're doing mentally, physically, emotionally. For many people, we do not know why they're there. We don't know what their needs are upon release so that there can be a seamless transition for reentry. That's a problem and does not exist in any other state system. So that needs to change. We need to reimagine a new prison facility that looks nothing like the old Lorton, the current DC jail, or the Federal Bureaus of Prisons. It needs to be forward-thinking and aligned with our statutes, and that's committed to racial justice and decarceration. We need to drastically shrink the parole system, and that starts with due process and procedural justice for the people who will be impacted by that system. We need to reform supervised release and surveillance in general, which I feel is the new mass incarceration. I believe that paternalism is the cousin racism. There are too many interruptions in people's lives. There are too many conditions that they're forced to contend with as they seek to reintegrate. I think that we should rethink policing and the charging decisions. I think that we should invest in reentry services, and that is starting to happen in the mayor's most recent proposed budget. It's the most money I've ever seen allotted for reentry services, and that needs to become the floor, and that needs to be the new direction. And last, there needs to be a dramatic, radical commitment to decarceration. What does that mean? That means all of the sentence reduction mechanisms of the last year, compassionate release, IRA, second look, good time reduction, that needs to be for everyone. If we are committed to decarceration and Black folks and our DC values, then we will be committed to giving people a second chance. We do not, as Professor Alinda Moyd says, we don't need to reform our system, we need to rebuild it.
Thank you. And Robert.
Just to piggyback on everyone, because everyone touched on beautiful subjects. I do believe we need to rebuild things. But one thing in particular that I would like to just see change tomorrow, it may be a little thing, but it's just more consistency right now from the parole commission. Period. We have no idea what they're going to do from one day to the next.
On that point, I have to say parole should be considered by the courts. I'm sure we will get to that. A lot more to say, but I saw an opening, so I had to go in.
Okay, so I
No,
got an
go
opening
ahead,
too.
go. No,
I got
explain what, so say more. What do you mean?
Oh, what do I mean?
Yeah.
Well, on my long list, what did I say? Procedural justice and due process. The parole decision is essentially an extension of sentencing because it impacts the liberty interest. The parole decision determines how long a person actually served, right? And when we're talking about sentencing and liberty interest, what we should be talking about is constitutional due process. We know from the model penal code that there is no model parole system in any state. And so people get the most due process rights in an open, transparent forum, which is DC Superior Court. The parole function, people often forget, have two sides. There's the parole grant function, which is dramatically diminishing for our DC folks. And so that should be decided by DC Superior Court. And that would be in line with the sentence reduction mechanisms that we already have and we've seen have been successful, especially in COVID. We personally appealed to the United States Parole Commission to release 60 people. When COVID first hit, they released 2. Many of those people were released under compassionate release and IRA, right? And so we see sentence reductions and decarceration working better in the courts. People also have a fact finder who's informed on the law, who knows the law. There's an appellate right process. See, for me, it's not about policy in the abstract. It's about the clients that I serve on the front lines, and what they want and what we would all want is constitutional due process, right? And so, but more importantly, here's the secret that doesn't get enough attention. The system that would keep the parole system going would be the revocation system. Give it, I don't know how many years, not that many years. The majority of what's going to keep that system going is supervised release. In federal court, supervised release, people who are facing revocation go back before their sentencing judge, because in their mind, supervised release looks a lot like probation. The same should be true in DC. People should go back before their sentencing judge. This isn't just Keisha's idea. Many of my clients, hundreds of them, are like, what do you mean? What do you mean? Who is this United States Parole Commission? Who are these people? Don't I go back before my judge? In their mind, it looks and feels and walks and talks like probation, right? So we should not create systems that incentivize us, criminal legal system actors, to keep our profession going and our reputation going and our economic interests going, but should benefit the 90% of people who are impacted by it, which in this city is 90% Black people. If we really want to change things for them, we should be decreasing the system. And I could do a separate call and an outline on how we could do that in the parole system. But that's what I think we should do.
So Kathy, can I just say that as Keisha very well knows, this is the only issue in the local control task force subcommittee where we have agreement. And it's a live issue. And what I mean by that is, some of these things, you need congressional legislation now to deal with, or you need statehood to deal with. But this issue of the U.S. Parole Commission, which of course is another one of these Revitalization Act issues, this is gonna have to be resolved by next year. Okay, it's already been extended. It was supposed to sunset, and the city wasn't ready yet to receive that function back. So the mayor asked Congresswoman Norton to get it extended, which she did. And so now the city has to decide between whether or not they have this as a function of the court, as Keisha has just argued, or whether or not the city decides that it wants to set up its own local board. to replace the federal board with a local board, which would have local residents on it, and make those decisions. And the record on these local boards around the country has been spotty, but people feel very strongly about this because the judges are still appointed by the President of the United States. And even if we get statehood, it's going to take a while for those judges no longer to be appointed by the President of the United States, because that's going to happen through attrition as people retire and new judges come on board. So some folks think that, we don't want these decisions being handled by still the feds, even though many judges would disagree that they're the feds. But in any event, I just wanted to point out, this is a very live issue. It's an issue where there are folks, on both sides. We decided in the task force to take a hybrid approach where we would recommend that there be a local board, but for second look and for compassionate release, the things that the court does now, they continue to do that. But this is an issue you got to watch closely, because there's going to have to be a robust debate in the city council about how to resolve this.
But can we just back up a
Can I
minute?
jump in on that?
Wait, we
Sorry,
can't.
I think we need just a little more explanatory information here for the audience that we have in terms of what is putting it in front of policymakers today. What is it that is requiring the decision making now? Just a little bit more explanation.
Because the
And we'll
U.S.
come back to
Parole
you.
the U.S. Parole Commission's authority over this function is going to expire, I want to say at the end of I think it's December of next year.
And that's based on?
Based on the sunset of the federal statute, which has already been extended. And so, these are decisions that the local system is going to have to be set up, whether or not the local, the local elected officials want this to be handled by the court, or whether they want it to be handled by a board or some kind of hybrid issue or something else entirely.
And this goes directly to my point about
planning,
right? Because the fact of the matter is, 2 points I want to make about this. Once again, I say this, ideologically, this sounds great. Practically, there's nothing that exists to absorb this function right now. And I say this in the most respectful way, you can want what you want, but if it doesn't exist for you to receive it, it doesn't matter. And very similar to this notion of returning, or returning citizens, like having them actually housed here in the District of Columbia. What does that mean? That's not even realistic, quite frankly. Where would we put a prison facility in the District of Columbia? So these are the things that practically, we had Lorton, which was in Virginia. DYRS is actually in Maryland. The DC jail is the only facility that is here, and that's hopefully one day will be torn down and built better without the blind spots and all the other issues with it. But the notion is that we can want these things, but they have to actually be planned for. And that's the nitty gritty part of, when we talk about, so if you ask me, what would I do if I were in charge? I'd actually plan, because that's essential to this entire discussion. And, and I think that's the thing that people I don't want to say don't want to do. It is the hard part of this. It sounds really good to say we would, we should, we could, but without the money, the thought, the actual really baking it in, it really is just an idea. And until we can actually get why would the mayor is adamant about, DC becoming a state, but to ask for an extension is a recognition, on the fact that we're not prepared for that. So so you're going to hear me say it over and over. I mean, Kathy, you know this. I'm in the weeds. I'm in the wonk. How does this practically work?
But where are our policymakers on this now? I mean, John, you mentioned that recommendations have been forthcoming. You are recommending a hybrid approach. Where are the rest of our policymakers on this?
May I respond, since I do this work all day, every day? The mayor, first of all, has identified some money in the recent proposed budget to commission a study on this, on how to actually get it done. There's also a group of people, I'm included in that group, who are working on the fine details of how to get it done. This is not speculation for me. This is not dream world for me. I know that we need to figure out what the policy guidelines look like, what the legislation look like, how that works with Congress. I understand that. To John's point, I really appreciate how he said the record is, quote, spotty. The record is not spotty. It's, quote, a failed institution. a 50-state survey of all paroles.
I was being diplomatic
I understand. I got to keep
because
it
there are
real.
folks who feel strongly about this.
Well, the best gift you can give somebody is honesty, right? And the fact of the matter is they are failed institutions. They are not what is the best interest of the people who are being impacted by them. But they are in the interest of the people who will be serving on that board, to the tune of a $30 million board that will employ, I don't know, upwards of the latest proposal I saw, upwards of 30 people for a diminishing population, which I mentioned, who will be incentivized to keep the revocation system going. This is not a matter of because we can't do it now and we don't have all the answers now, that we do not commit ourselves, Janine, to figuring that out.
I didn't say that.
I'm not saying, I'm
But I
just
do agree with
referencing that,
Janine,
but-
Keisha, that if we have to ask for another extension, that's going to look really bad, and particularly for those of us fighting so hard for statehood. So
Right.
point there, Janine, for sure.
All the more reason why the court should absorb it, instead of trying to create this new parole board from scratch to fund it and to have people be employed by it. That's not ready to go in the next year. The court
I may not
now.
have the so broader outlook on things, but if you ask me who 4 or 5 years ago, when it was time for me to see the parole board, who I would have wanted to see, I wanted to see a member of my peers in front of me, not my judge who may have, my judge who gave me all the time in the world. I thought that it was at 18. I don't want to see him. I want to see somebody who may understand a little bit better.
While I respect that, many returning citizens at the last hearing, the vast majority testified that they would rather it be in the court. There's entire, because I speak to all, see this again, this isn't theory for me. I'm on these community calls at night. I'm in the community daily before the pre-pandemic, and people, the returning citizens that I speak to, I'm an officer of the court, so I'm not going to make a false representation. The vast majority prefer to go before a judge. Why? Because they want a quote fair fight.
Can I come back to one of the first points that was made in this conversation, not on the parole commission, but on where our people are housed? The point was made that somebody in each one of 122 facilities all over the country. How do we get from here to there? So we take control, we're in charge. What do we do the next day? How do we in fact bring people home? Thoughts on that?
Well,
what are the planning steps there?
The Council for Court Excellence has put forward as part of their report a 3-part plan that would bring folks back, and that would ultimately close.
But back where? Back where?
Well, that's Jane's point. That's
DC
a decision
jail.
that, well, at first the DC jail.
Yes.
Okay, but a decision ultimately would have to be made by local elected officials here, whether or not they're going to build a prison here, or whether they're going to contract to build a prison someplace else. And I will tell you that one of the reasons why we didn't build the prison, remember the promise of the Federalization Act was that there would have been facilities close or in the district. The Bureau of Prisons came to the District of Columbia. They went around to different neighborhoods. They looked at sites, they talked to folks, and what they heard was, no, don't put that here. And so they did what bureaucrats do. They took the path of least resistance, which was just to put these folks, all over the place in BOP facilities around the country. So that's going to be a very difficult decision that politicians are going to have to make, whether or not we do that. Now, it's made easier, I hope, by the fact that I think we're all committed to decarceration. And so there's 4,000 folks in these facilities now. Many of us would like to see less than 2,000. They'd like to see 1,500. A lot of these folks, are there on drug crimes, felonies, and the like. So we can make those decisions too. And so this doesn't have to be some behemoth that you build. You might be able to do this in a way that's acceptable. But again, to Janine's point, you got to be planning for it right now, because statehood's live too.
We have to
but it's not
plan.
an academic exercise anymore.
We have to plan, but everything, and I'm going to repeat this all night, centers from our values. Once you decide where you want to be, you can work on the plan to get there. I have a saying, let's figure out all the ways in which this can work and not how it can't work. If you start from the premise of it's too expensive, it's too hard, it's too big, there's no political will, then you're going to play right into your own negative mindset. And so what I'm saying is our new values that have really increased in the last couple of years, especially with George Floyd, the racial reckoning, the commitment, nationwide commitment to decarceration, police reform, all of those efforts say we want to see a change. Now we do the work to get the change and not be daunted by how hard it's going to be to work. I'm ready to work.
Yeah, Keisha, I think you're right on that. I mean, I think part of the problem in the past has been, who these folks are, right? I mean, these are folks who can be demonized. These are folks who, can be seen as the other, these aren't folks whose votes politicians are trying to get, incarcerated citizens. I'm going to tell you something. Just this week, we swore in the first ANC commissioner in the District of Columbia from the DC jail. Right. And so I think what you're talking about, I think we're seeing a change in this country. And I think that there's going to be a renewed focus on how we do these things and to accept our brothers and sisters who happen to be incarcerated as our brothers and sisters and to do the right thing by them.
Can I say this? I appreciate what you both have said. I mean, I'm struck by it because I agree with you that once we set our values, it becomes our true north. But I think that I wouldn't say that we all have the same values, because I mean, we had Bureau of Prisons try to put a halfway house in the district in 2 different sites. And you saw elected officials on the council try to stop that from going into Ward 7, going into Ward 5, right? Then you also saw homeless shelters that we decided to put a homeless shelter, just homeless people, right? People who don't have some place to live. Where was the compassion in that when residents in Ward 3 were adamantly opposed to having a small shelter in their neighborhood? So while I appreciate
it's there and it's functioning.
Yes,
so
exactly.
There is a difference. That was a policy initiative that actually did go forward. So,
but my point is that I wouldn't assume everybody shares your values, and it's not to say you don't, but it's to recognize you have to address the concern. You have to figure it out, right? You've got a plan for that. And you have to be able to withstand the backlash that comes with that, right? That is a political backwill. It is knowing your true north and saying, this is the right thing to do, so it should be done. And because I think the one thing that we have to, because I don't, and like I said, I want to make sure that we appreciate this, that since not everyone shares the value, right, we have to figure out how to speak to that person and not just overrun them, because then they become the problem. They become the reason why we can't get a halfway house in Ward 7, right? So like I said, that's part of it too, that we have to take into account. It's not just bringing, our neighbors or residents home. It's how do we teach people not to be afraid? How do we help them understand that if this were your family member, wouldn't you want this person near you, close to you, want them to be successful? That's the reason why the reentry services are so extremely important, because that's the negating argument for not in my backyard, not in my neighborhood. It's this person has a job, this person is going to work, this person has a support structure and a system. I used to work in the criminal justice agency in New York City when I was in college, that the Vera Institute started. And what they did was it made bail recommendations to the judges. And I worked, and this is ridiculous, I worked from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. in the morning. It was like, let me just say, those were not the fun hours to work.
Great social life, Janine.
Right, exactly. But the point is that the 2 most important things in terms of making a bail recommendation was employment and stable housing. Those are the 2 most important things in terms of reentry services, I believe, as well. Stable housing and a job. And we have to help people understand, what does it look like to return someone to the district, so that there's a greater degree of comfort with that, so that it does become our shared community value.
So Walter, do you want to jump in here?
Well, I do. Thank you very much. I mean, it's interesting listening to the conversation. It seems to me, although the topic was, what if we were in charge? How would we make things better? There are things, as this conversation demonstrates, that the District of Columbia can and should be doing today, even though we may not be in charge of those things. There are things that we can control now and should be doing it. And some of it are things we could and should be investing in right now in the city, that are part of decarceration, that are part of housing issues, that are part of workforce development issues, that are part of mental health issues, that are part of drug abuse issues. So much of the criminal justice system that gets triggered here, and so much of the needs on reentry could be improved in this city if we were doing more investing in our community. And we can and should be doing that, whether or not we control what the U.S. Attorney's Office is doing, whether or not we appoint our judges, whether or not we are now running all of our prisons. I don't want people to think that the topic here ought to be, geez, if we only had statehood, we could take control of things. The likelihood of statehood anytime soon, my own view, is not great, but I'm glad that statehood has in some ways teed up this issue. The fact that statehood may be out there and has caused people to say, gosh, if we had statehood, what would we do about criminal justice reform? Let's also be thinking about, what should we be doing on criminal justice reform, even though we don't have statehood right now? And that's a good bit of the topic that's being discussed. And let me 100% agree with Janine that whatever you decide are your priorities now, before we get statehood, you have to plan for them.
Yep.
They are not self-executing. They are not free. Most of the things we are talking about, I believe, are good investments, but you're going to have to figure out what are the dollars you're going to use to make those investments.
I want to talk about the values first, because first of all, I just put in the chat the mayor's plan for DC values. Again, I don't do speculation, I do facts, and we know what the values are as voted on by DC residents. Is it going to be everyone's values? Of course not. That's never going to be the case. There's millions of people who wanted slavery, the institution, to keep going, and was not in favor of abolition, right? So we know that's the case, but in this city, the 8 values that have been identified are accessibility, diversity, equity, livability, opportunity, prosperity, resilience, and safety. And those 8 values are for everyone, right? And so for the people coming home, they're not those people to me, they're not returning citizens to me, they are people who have just as right anyone else to those 8 values. And so when we talk about those values, we have a compass in our city. That is what should guide us. And when we roll up our sleeves and do the work, as John, Janine, and Walter said, I completely agree that we have to plan, but we know what those values are and we know that they work, even in spite of NIMBY, right? Again, I was on the ground doing a lot of the community activism and work around the halfway house. Our mayor is on record. There should be a halfway house in the District of Columbia. The majority of the council, there should be a halfway house in the District of Columbia. There was a minority voice that said that there should not be a halfway house in certain wards, but the people came together, the majority of the community, and said, no, for our people, we want a halfway house, because here's what we know, especially about Black people. The continuum at any given point, you're a victim, you're an offender, you're a family member. The majority of police in this city are Black. The majority of people who are incarcerated are Black. Many of the victims are Black. And so for Black people, they have a lot of the same interests on those same constituencies.
And Robert, were you jumping in here?
No.
Kathy, could I just underscore
Oh,
something
sure,
that Walter
sure,
was saying,
sure.
which is that, and I think it's important for folks to understand this, that, I think all of us are for statehood. I'm certainly for statehood. And statehood would be a very neat way, and I say that in quotes because there's a lot of details, but a very neat way to fix all of this, because we immediately, have control. Yes, there would have to be a transition to be able to, phase in the elements of that control. But, statehood is the big fix, and we're all for that. But let me tell you something. Everything we're talking about tonight can be done without statehood. Every single one of them, and in fact, the dirty little secret is, talking about the prisons, the Bureau of Prisons wants to give us back the system now, right now. There have been discussions between the District of Columbia and the Bureau of Prisons. If they could give it back tomorrow, they don't want to deal with this. They have a whole system that they have to deal with. They don't want to be dealing with DC folks. And the fact of the matter is that we are not yet in a position to be able to assume those functions back again. Part of the problem is cost, by the way, because the Bureau of Prisons, it costs them far less to incarcerate somebody per day than it costs us. In fact, it's by a factor of like 2 or something. It's a pretty extraordinary number. And part of that is because we provide a lot more services than they do in the Bureau of Prisons, going back to our values. But, you don't need statehood to do this stuff. Many of these issues are live. We talked about parole. That's a very live issue. Prisons, if we wanted them back tomorrow, we could figure that out. The prosecutors and the courts are a little different, because I don't think the courts are too ready to give up that nice commission, from the President of the United States on their wall with the signature on it, right? And of course, the prosecutors, the U.S. attorney, doesn't want to give up its prosecutorial function, immediately, I would say. But we can be working on this stuff now, and even before we get statehood, because statehood's not going to happen tomorrow. We're closer than we've ever been, but there are still significant hurdles. We can be getting parts of this system back right now.
Can I just underscore what John
John.
said? I mean, I think we all agree with this, but I hope this is a message that people can take away from this conversation. A lot of the reforms that are being discussed here are reforms that we ought to be working on right now, with or without statehood. And irrespective of whether or not the federals seem to be controlling us, we need to be getting ready to improve these things with or without the federal control and with or without statehood. But I come back to Janine's point. Even if we do the more minor things, John breezily put to one side the U.S. Attorney's Office and the court. Even the other things we're talking about here that are so important, they too are going to cost money. And they too are going to take planning if we're going to get them implemented. I happen to think they would be good investments for the city. I happen to think the payoff from making those investments might end up paying for themselves through the improvements we would make within the city.
And what specifically are you referring to, Walter? Which investments?
Well, I believe some of the investments are in the report that John and his group did. I believe we need to be much more concerned about workforce development. I think we need to be much more concerned about affordable housing and about drug abuse and about mental health support. All of those not only improve our citizenry, but they serve a word we've used here many times tonight, decarceration. I think they may serve us well in preventing crimes from happening in the first place. I think the more we start investing in those kind of community undertakings, the better off we're going to be. I realize this is broader than the issue that we're talking about here, but I think it relates to us achieving success on the issues we're talking about here.
I want to echo what John said. Did you see me getting excited in my chair? If I was in church,
I saw that, Keisha.
Yes.
You were mad at me before when I was talking about parole, and then you start getting
Oh,
excited.
I can switch any side on a dime. I mean, come on, I'm a lawyer. I'm with you, John. All right, let me amplify what John just said. Sometimes we use this, well, we don't have control. almost as an escape clause or an excuse. There's a lot that we can be doing right now. Because for my clients, it doesn't matter whether the label is federal government or DC government, right? What they care about is liberty. What they care about is dignity. What they care about is a second chance. And what they care about is investments, right? We know from James Foreman's book, Locking Up Our Own, that there was a 40-year piecemeal number of policies that led to mass incarceration, specifically in the District of Columbia. Many of the leaders were Black, right? And there were a lot of policies when we did have local control. So let's not be seduced by the idea that just because we have local control, all of a sudden everything's solved. No, we can start solving things now. We can start to identify our values now. We saw how quickly we were able to change things, again, with COVID, with the change in the good time credits that had major benefits and consequences for our clients. It ended up releasing some people immediately, same with compassionate release, same with IRA. So we know there are things that we can do. We look at the investment in reentry. The reentry landscape in DC has changed dramatically in the last 3 years because we are putting our values first. We are leading with our values. I could go on and on in this call.
But what are the specifics
now.
in decarceration? What are the policy steps, and are they on anyone's agenda? Are they on anyone's, front burner? The different, like you mentioned, the good time credits. Are there specifics there that are on an agenda right now or should be, and what are they and whose agenda?
Well, we could do, get whatever label, I often tell my team, think of it as a tool belt, right? We have any number of tools to try to help people get their liberty. That's the bottom line, right? And so we can increase those tools, which we've already been doing in the District of Columbia, whether it's compassionate release, the Incarceration Reduction Amendment Act, which is now on its third version. We need second look, essentially, or Incarceration Reduction Act, or sentence reduction, whatever label you want to give it. We need it for everyone, right? Everyone should be given an opportunity to make their case. It's not guaranteed. The vast majority of people are not released, but give them the opportunity to make their case, because what do we know from the vast majority of the IRA recipients? They are thriving. They are doing well. They are leaders in our community. They add value to our community. They add value to their families. Black families are broken. We are weathered and we are traumatized from what mass incarceration did, not to just the people suffering like Mr. Davis, but to all of us. I know personally what that does to families and communities. And so everyone needs to be given that opportunity for their dignity to be valued, right? So that's something we could do. There could be presumptive parole at 60, presumptive second chance at 60. There are so many things that we can do that would give people a second chance.
And the legislation you mentioned, DC legislation, federal legislation, I'm sorry, I wasn't sure.
This was
what you were referring
DC
to.
legislation.
Yeah.
Everything I'm talking about is DC. And see,
Again,
that's part
stuff
of
we
it.
can do now, because frankly, I think that values, aren't going to be the biggest hurdle here.
Right.
I think the biggest hurdle here is money. These things that we're talking about, if you add all of them up, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, okay? Hundreds of millions of dollars. And, there's only so many ways you could get that money. I mean, Janine will tell you from her days on the council budget, it's not. And
better yet, John, sitting in 4 years of sitting with Mayor Gray, planning to deliver a budget to the council, and then me being responsible for getting that budget through. So
it's not that complicated, right? You can either cut services or you can, raise revenue.
Raise taxes, right?
Raise revenue is a fancy way of saying increase people's taxes. Okay. And, until we're a state, we don't have the ability to tax all of the income, derived at the source here in the District of Columbia, which is, again, a fancy way of saying commuter tax. So if we're going to do some of these things or try to do some of these things before statehood, again, we've got to make the decision. Do we want to cut services, certain services or certain agencies to be able to fund these things that we would assume back into the district system? Or do we want to raise taxes on rich folks to pay for it? And we saw the council tried to do that, fairly recently it was stopped, and there's going to be another effort, could be this budget cycle, to do the same, and we'll see where that goes. But
the other thing is, John, this is what I think, and Kathy was exceptional when she was a council member at doing this. Oversight. Actually practice oversight. I mean, when Odie Washington was in charge of the Department of Corrections, I'll say it politely, Kathy Patterson put her foot in his hind parts on a regular basis to drive down overcrowding in the jail. When the Department of Fire and Emergency Medical Services was rampant with overtime, Phil Mendelson called a hearing every month to drive down overtime.
Yeah, but that's not going to get you $700-800 million.
The reason why this is important is because it also matters in terms of taking over functions. If we don't get our own house in order in terms of how we behave and how we govern, then the cost is higher. Then the cost is higher. And so, and it's not to say, because the fact of the matter is that because the other thing that happens during budget season, right, is that populations are pitted against each other. They just are, because nobody has enough money, right? Charter schools are battling DC public schools. Affordable housing is battling, developers who say it costs so much to develop. Then you have, high income earners who are saying, I am funding this district government coupled with commercial property tax, and now you want more? And it's and you're saying that, there's a push-pull out there saying that I want to pay more, right? So that's what the budget is. It's a battle of interests. And the mayor did an exceptional job when she first came into office in wow, how long ago was that, right? When she first came into office in 2015 on her first budget, when she held these budget forums, and she forced residents to parcel out that dollar. And so I say that because, and having sat and having worked for 3 different elected officials who had 3 different agendas, but all the same agenda, right? There are competing interests at all times. And, the true master of an elected official is re-election.
I attended several of those budget forums in the community, by the way. Those were good, and I was happily there with my pencil and paper. Here's the secret. In order to pay for this big criminal legal system, right, this issue that you're bringing up, which is a real issue, is because we need to fund the machine.
Yeah.
Right.
If we shrink the machine.
Yeah. Let's get real for a second. Let's get really real. Allow this to sit in for a second. I just want to. What if our system was cut by half? John put that out there, not defender. John said, oh, can we get to 2,000? Can we 1,500? Yes, we can. Yes, we should. We just saw it with the pandemic. How convenient. Ooh, arrest went down, detention went down, release went up.
Compassionate release.
Compassionate release. We weren't so bloodthirsty for this solution to public safety, which has been courts, prosecution, and judges, right? We can choose to reinvest our money in jobs, education, housing, these other competing systems by shrinking criminal justice. Now you may say, Keisha, you're in La La Land somewhere. You're a public defender. That's not real. What about all the crime that's happening? That's not what's fueling our mass incarceration. We know that the crime rate has been going down. Facts. We know that what fuels incarceration in the District of Columbia is often parole revocation. Facts. We could change and shrink the parole system, the supervised release system. In my time, since I've been in this, there's hardly anyone in the DC jail, I feel like I'm going to get a lot of things thrown at me for saying that on this call. That's not entirely true. But compared to when I started, right, when it was overcrowded, and let's not talk about the days back in Lorton, it's happening in Philadelphia, it's happening in Louisiana. You can dramatically decide we are going to do something different. Not to mention all the people you can take out of the system from the beginning. They're called off-ramps, and we can do it. But this is where we got to get real. And I recommend that everyone watch The 13th on Netflix. Do we really, truly, secretly want to reduce our system? Because it keeps a lot of people employed It keeps a lot of private companies making money. It employs many of us. It keeps it all going, all in the name of public safety.
So
We
to your point, Keisha, to your point, every year that I worked on the DC Council, every year that I worked for Mayor Gray, every single year, council member after council member called for an increase in the size of the police force. I started on the council on an ominous day, September 11th, 2001. That was part of the budget. Then 2002, increased the size of the police force. I remember when I left government in 2014, the call was for 4,000 officers. So you're absolutely right. Now I'm trying to figure out, and I remember thinking this, why do we need so many police officers? But part of the reason why we need so many police officers is because residents feel unsafe. Not that they really are unsafe, they feel unsafe, right? So that's another thing that we really have to grapple with. And the fact of the matter, there are only 3 votable issues in the District of Columbia: economic development, schools, and public safety. You will never hear, there's no difference between any politician running for office where they say, nobody says, hey, you know what? I want somebody to break into your house. Nobody says, you know what? I want your kid to be dumb. Nobody says that I want an abandoned building next door to you and nobody working. Every elected official says that. And that's why, you know, like I said, Kathy, you remember this. How many times every single year we would be in the budget and there was a call to increase the size of the police force, right? So you're right, the system is sort of self-perpetuating, right? But then the other thing, let's talk about this if we really want to get real, because you're right, people are employed by this system. What are you going to do with the unions, right? What are you going to do with them? And that's part of the planning, because it isn't just, because I also want to, it's not just, you know, what happens with, you know, the prison system or reentry. Can we stop people from going to jail? And it's not just the police officers, right?
So can we come back? I know we sort of said, well, U.S. Attorney's Office, courts, you know, that's going to be a really tough one to address. But what are the factors in not having local control of prosecution that contributes to what we're speaking about? Should that be on the list of things to address prior to statehood? What can we do about prosecutions? Is that a policy in terms of what doesn't get to court? What gets dealt with before that? What's part of the decarceration at the front end, not at the back end? So can you say more? I mean, why do we want local control of our prosecuting agencies?
Accountability.
Because of the charging.
Right.
The charging.
It's about liberty, pure and simple.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to take somebody's liberty away, that person has to be, you know, whoever's making that decision has to be accountable to somebody.
Right. Yep. Plain and simple. You know, the U.S. Attorney's Office for many people is basically, you know, they go there and use poor Black folks as target practice trial skills, right? So that they can say, I was a federal prosecutor, right? But again, I want to double down on this premise for a second, all right? Don't all come guns a-blazing. Local control, statehood doesn't equal more liberty for my clients necessarily, right? It's not like an automatic. We have to, again, these same values would apply if we had local control, right? Same values that I'm talking about. And so I don't think it's automatic, but to your point, if we had a local prosecutor, it would impact charging decisions. But really that first starts with the criminal code, which was the very first thing that I mentioned on this call. That needs to be changed, the tools and the armor that they have in the first place. Then charging decisions, discretion, and that really matters if folks are aligned with the community's values. And don't forget, the community is changing. Gentrification is real. So we don't necessarily know what things are going to look like 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. But right now, community is committed toward decarceration, a public health approach, racial justice. Those are our values right now.
Can I pick up on Keisha's point and tie it to Kathy's question? We looked at how this functions in other jurisdictions. In the majority of them, you would have someone who would be an elected district attorney. So unless we assigned everything the US attorney has right now over to our attorney general, one option would be that we would have a new office, an elected district attorney who would prosecute the DC code offenses that our US attorney prosecutes right now. And to pick up on Keisha's point, that elected person would be accountable to the public because it would be an elected position. And presumably, if she's right about our shared values, then that elected person would share those values. Right now, of course, we have no control over who the US attorney is or what choices the US attorney is making. And there's often very little coordination between what's happening there and with what the district elected officials would want to be choosing or what our elected attorney general would want to be choosing. So Kathy, that's one reason why it really does matter. However, I want to come back to Janine's point again. If we're going to do that, this is a major costly undertaking. I think the U.S. Attorney's Office here in the district is what, by far the largest in the country?
It
It
is.
is.
Okay, so over 300 attorneys and over
Yes.
300 staff support.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a major undertaking. To use Keisha's word again, values, if your values are such that having that kind of control and knowing that your values are going to be reflected by an elected district attorney, if we don't give all this to our own attorney general, which is one possibility, then you decide that's an investment that you want to make and that the payoff is going to be worth it. But we're not there yet. I mean, I don't think we've even begun to have that conversation. But if we get closer to statehood, as John will often point out, we're going to have a transition period, even if we get to statehood, and we can figure out whether or not we want to spend the money.
But that really is the beauty of all of this, that how often do you get a chance to really design this from the ground up, right?
Yes.
Even if we're talking about the things, prior to statehood, I mean, let me put it this way. The Revitalization Act was passed in 1997. That was literally a generation ago, right? We have another opportunity right now, okay? A once in a generation opportunity, I believe, as we are, reimagining what this country is going to look like with respect to racial justice, following the death of George Floyd, coming out of this pandemic, building back better, whatever you want to call it. We are at a moment in this country. And I think we're at a moment here in the District of Columbia where we can take a really hard look at some of these things and we can decide how we want to design this system for the next generation and take control of some of these things now. And so I don't think we're focusing on this enough, frankly. I think this should be one of the most important things, if not the most important thing that we're dealing with right now in the District of Columbia. And so I think it's important, for all the folks listening here who I know care about these issues, to talk to their elected officials, to talk to their council members, to talk to the mayor, to talk to the mayor's office, and to explain how important this is and how we have this moment, which could pass us by. It could pass us by.
Amen. Again, here I am in the peanut gallery for John. We do have a moment. Now, you said we're not focused enough on this issue. I think that's true. It's not true for the people impacted by this decision.
Absolutely correct.
Laser focused. I get chills from the amount of organization that is going on by returning citizen-led organizations like National Reentry Network for Returning Citizens, like the Hope Foundation, like National Reentry, it's called NARC, too many acronyms. The bottom line is folks are on the ground. If you look at the last oversight hearing of ESJG, so many returning citizens testified, so many reentry organizations testified. I wrote an entire chapter in the book about civic participation. The new voting law that recently passed, enfranchising people now with felony convictions, who is doing that work on the ground? returning citizens. Because here is the thing. 90% of the people impacted are Black folks in Black communities. We need to center them in this discussion. Not just a token panelist, that's not taking anything away from Mr. Davis. I see this all the time.
We're
Not,
coming to you next, Robert.
That's
Yeah.
right.
not a token person on a committee or a working group, but it should be from the inside out. Why? Because I'm a servant leader. I believe that we serve the people, that we pass policies that impact them. They should not only be at the table, they should be setting the table, they should be leading it. As they say, you are not, what do they say? If you're not at the table,
You're on the table.
you're on the menu.
Yeah.
Right?
And Robert, can we go to you, Robert? How do you see yourself leading? How do you provide leadership? So can you talk about some of the stuff that you've been doing?
Sure. One of the main things I do is I don't stop talking. I don't stop talking about my experiences. For example, after doing 21 years and then coming home and being on parole, I was supposed to be on parole for the rest of my life, right? So I'm doing great on parole. I have 2 jobs. And I asked my parole officer, I said, can I be taken off parole, early termination? Well, CSOSA switched POs so much, right, that I got 1 PO, I got 1 PO, I got 1 PO, I got 1 PO. So somewhere down that line, somebody put in for me to get early termination. And it was approved. But it never made it to my current PO. So I wind up doing 8 months on supervised release or parole, whatever you want to call it. And I had a signed certificate from the U.S. Parole Commission dated 8 months prior that I was released. And if not for friends inquiring about my hearing that I was supposed to have, I would still be on parole, taking your analysis and all that right now to this day. So one of the things that I do is I don't stop talking. I tell everyone about all of my experiences, good and bad. Right now I work for ULS. I do everything I possibly can for all my returning citizens, all my clients, but I don't stop talking. I want everyone to know just how, I don't know, unpredictable these things are. The parole commission, to give you a quick example, I came home 5 years ago. There were 3 of us, 3 co-defendants. I was the primary, right? I got 21 years. They got their years. I saw the parole commission. I come home. They are still in jail. One of them just got a 5-year hit. How is that going on when you have the primary on the street doing good, doing bad, whatever? But there's just like no communication going on. There's no communication. And so some of the things I do is I just don't shut up.
Another amen to Mr. Davis. So those are the stories that I hear every day. Not just here, those are the stories that I cry about when I'm sitting next to Mr. Davis's co-defendant who got a 5-year hit. It's called a set-off by the United States Parole Commission. What does 5 years mean?
That's another sentence.
Baby girl's graduation.
Yes.
I thought I was going to come out in time for my daughter's middle school graduation. Now I'm hoping I come out in time for her high school graduation. That means my mom, who was on dialysis, and I don't know how much longer she has, it's possible she's going to die before I get out. These are real conversations. This is the weight that I carry. Nobody can tell that story like the people who actually experience it. and the people like me who witness it. There is not a correlation between many of these policies and the impact that it has on people's lives. Like, for example, people, there are so many conditions. Mr. Davis is talking about conditions. We've been talking about courts and prosecutors. No. Focus on supervision. Supervision is the new mass incarceration. Yes, I said it. It is what perpetuates the system, the ongoing surveillance, and the many owners, all of the conditions that aren't necessarily narrowly tailored to people's personal needs. Conditions such like you can't be in relation, you can't engage anyone else with a felony conviction. What does that mean for entire communities in the District of Columbia? What does that actually serve? Right? That's a problem. There's all these conditions that completely interrupt people's lives. Did you hear about the woman recently who was revoked on home confinement because she was in violation? She was supposed to be back wherever she was, the halfway house, wherever she was supposed to be. But where was she? She was at a computer program and didn't understand where she was supposed to be, and she was revoked. You may say, oh, that's crazy. Things like this aren't happening. What? They happen all day, every day. Right? I could go on another call with the harm of the supervision / surveillance system. You want to talk about budgets? That's a $300 million budget. You want to talk about influence? That is also a position appointed by the president. And, philosophy they have, an approach, they have the supervision, right? When it was under the old DC system, there was a commitment to social services. Many of the supervision officers had a background in social work. Right? So these are the things that we really need to talk about. I say that paternalism is the cousin to racism. We should be in people's lives for a limited amount of time for the sole purpose of serving their needs. Why do we have supervised release? Why does it go on for so long? That's not what the social science studies support. No.
So where do we go on that issue? What's the agenda on that issue?
You can reform the supervised release statute. You can have a presumption of early termination. That's already in the statute. That can be reformed. By the way, if anyone's on this call, that's a service that we provide, early termination representation. There's a lot that we can do. There's no reason for people to necessarily, they're working, they're law abiding, so there's not a concern about reoffending, and they're great citizens in their community. Why are they still on supervision? Because here's the thing about supervision, it's designed in many ways for people to fail. They can't comply with all of the conditions, and so they get revoked for many technical violations, which was also better under the old local system, and they get sent back to jail. Now, yes, little incremental reforms are happening along the way, but I'm not talking about incremental reforms. I'm talking about a radical change in our values and how we design the system.
Robert?
I just wanted to piggyback on Keisha, because it's CSOSA creates a 3D effect in reference to like prosecution, because guys go through the system, go through the court system, they got to see the parole board, then they come home, and then guess what? They got somebody else who is like supposed to be helping me, but they're actually trying to lock them up. And that's the thing, like with my clients that I have today, with my new job, I have, opportunities to actually see this going on and talk to these POs and tell them like, hey, that's not a good idea. You know what I mean? Let's work with these guys. Let's get these guys, let's put them back in prison off your mind for a second, and let's figure out how we're going to get these guys straight. We have resources. Let's give them to them. Let's not just tell them you better do this, you better do that, you got to do it by this time, you have to do it in this manner. Let's give these guys a working chance. But I see it all the time. CSOSA is just like out of control. Sorry.
Let me just say, we've got about another 10 minutes, And folks who are in our audience, some of the panelists may be able to stay past 8:30 and take some questions. So if you want to put questions in the chat, we'll try to address some of those questions. But let me ask you, what else do folks listening need to know about these issues in order to think about the changes that can be made now prior to statehood, and the changes that need to be made and should be made, and the things that we should be thinking about in terms of statehood and the planning? What else do people need to know about these subjects? You all have a huge amount of expertise. What else needs more visibility, needs more discussion? What are we not touching on?
I think, so often we hear Black Lives Matter, right? In the context of people's lives being snuffed out on the streets by law enforcement, right? We get that, right? Somebody should have the ability to live. But Black Lives Mattering begins before they're snuffed out on the street, right? Black Lives Mattering means I should be able to see and to touch and to hug my family so I can be whole. Black Lives Mattering means I'm not dropped off on a mountain hundreds of miles away from my family in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Black Lives Mattering means I don't see my mother once every 3 years when she can afford to get the money to come see me. Black Lives Mattering means after you've incarcerated me for 20, 30, 40 years, we have clients that you don't drop me out of the window without a parachute when I come home. And that there's a transition plan in place for housing, for job placement and training, computer training. You don't leave me out to dry, because for people who are not Black people, the same wouldn't be done. Look at the affluenza case. Y'all remember the affluenza case? The young boy who took out like 7 people and I don't know, sentence. Why? Because for dominant culture, who's often usually in charge, white folks, they could see their son in him. They could see their potential in him. They can see his life ahead of him and why that matters. It is easy to have destructive, heartbreaking, heart-wrenching policies like slavery and mass incarceration when the people that are damaged by it don't matter. You can put somebody far off when you can't see yourself in them. For me, I see myself. I see my family. It is one in the same. When we all feel that, it's like in the movie A Time to Kill, when I maybe made up that line, John Grisham, when the guy says, now open your eyes, close your eyes, imagine she's white. You remember that famous line? And the juror's like, oh my God, I get it, guilty. That's because they felt it. They saw it. It was real. It was acute for them. It was in their bones. That's how I feel about the community that we're talking about, the 90% Black people. When we all feel that way, things will change. That's what's missing.
Kathy, can I ask Robert a question along these lines? Because I'm fascinated to know, Robert, how far away you were when you were incarcerated, and what barriers did you feel in terms of connections back to the community, and how were you able to try and keep those connections so that when you came home, there was something there for you? I'm interested in your experience along those lines.
Sorry to say, I did 8 years in California. That was
as far away as you can be.
As far away as I can be. I did 8 years, and it was terrible. I mean, there's no easy way to put it. And if you guys don't know, every BOP facility has its own rules. It's like has its own mayor, has its own governor. And it's like, it was just terrible. So some of the things I did, trying to get over the hurdle of being so far away from home, I just, maybe tried to write a lot. I tried to read a lot. I tried to take myself out of the mindset of where I am, right? But there wasn't much I could do to fix what maybe I could have fixed if I was closer. There was nothing that I could do about it. But I just tried to weather the storm as much as I could. That was the longest I did. The furthest away from home was that 8-year chunk in California. But I mean, like I said, every prison has its own set of everything. So it's like Victorville, California may allow you to be more, as much as you can be more family oriented, as opposed to like Atwater, California, all USPs. They're just like, they don't care about you and your family or whatever. So it's like the luck of the draw. And even on this end, like right now, in the role that I play now, I have to get legal calls because I try to touch guys before they're even coming out to establish a relationship so that maybe I can be there when they get off the bus. If they don't have family, I can just do everything I possibly can. So I try to, start my work when they're in. But I call one institution, one counselor lets me talk to the guy. I call another institution, that counselor is like, I'm not giving him a legal call. He doesn't have a court case in the next 10 days. You know what I mean? And there's just no precedence. There's no like guidelines or anything. So it's like, it was tough, put it like that. It was tough to be so far away from home. And I just did the best I could with keeping my family, abreast of what was going on with me. I tried to make sure that I didn't lose contact with anyone. And quite frankly, I'm just like glad that I was able to come home and not sink. I was able to float and then take off, because now I can speak for some of the guys who need my voice to say, hey, I want that same shot Mr. Davis got, because I can do the same things Mr. Davis is doing. I don't have to be, and I want to touch on something. The 3 hardest things that returning citizens come up against but need so much when they come home is employment, housing, and healthcare. But those are the 3 scarcest things. Like maybe we can get healthcare, but the employment and the housing, like, so my role right now, as minute as it is to make sure I can get those things for every guy I touch.
Kathy, can I just try to build on what I
Thank
hear
you.
Robert and Keisha saying, and housing and healthcare, and just basic support for people. Those are things this city needs to be doing more of, period. Not only to be supporting returning citizens, but to be supporting other low-income residents in this city. And sometimes that kind of support keeps people from being in prison in the.
Thank you.
Yes, yes, Walter,
And
yes.
but we need to see that. Janine made the important point a minute ago. The budget is always a fight over where you're going to put money. I think the city needs to better understand that these kinds of investments are win-wins across the board, because the fewer people we send to prison and the more we take care of the returning citizens, the more benefit is going to come to the city in the first place. So if we will invest up front in these basic needs that Robert is talking about and Keisha is talking about, this is very easy for me to say, it's hard to do, but this is part also of the basic values that Keisha was talking about. And I think that that's one of the lessons that I take from this conversation. And what's really interesting to me is, again, this is really not so much about the fight between local control and federal control. It's about things that the District of Columbia can itself be doing now.
Another amen, another.
And if we come back to our title, what if we were in charge? It's a good point. Let's just sort of pretend we are and see what we can do. I think that's a very good point. Let me thank John and Robert and Keisha and Walter and Janine. Thank you all for your participation. And for everyone to know, what we're doing with this conversation is it'll become an edited transcript and we'll be issuing it as a report, because these are good conversations and good subjects and things that people do need to know about. And so now we're going to close out, and just let me say thanks to everybody for participating, and thank you for being with the Council for Court Excellence and the Office of the DC Auditor tonight. And thank you, and we'll see what we make of all this. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
Good night.
Yeah.
Stick with us and we'll take a little bit of time for questions for those that can stay. So thank you. And this is the voice of Misty Thomas from Council for Court Excellence, but I'm pleased to introduce my colleague, Emily Tatro, our Deputy Director, who's going to be happy to stick with our two wonderful friends, Robert and Keisha, to facilitate a few answers. So thank you all.
Thank
Good
you.
evening. We have one question in the chat right now, asking, it's one thing to say that our political leaders have stated values and are talking about the need to do these things, but we haven't seen, people put money for transferring parole from the U.S. Parole Commission. We haven't people seen money for opening up more spots to bring people home from the BOP. Do either of you have thoughts about what it will take to actually get DC to take those next steps?
Well, what do they say? Ask me what your values are, and there your treasure lies also. So you put your money into things that you care about. And so I think that's an excellent point by the person who asked the question. What we can do is hold our elected officials accountable, right? They're accountable to us. As I often remind people and empower them, they work for us. Janine brought up a really good point, which is so much of this policy is led by politicians getting reelected. And what did she speak to? She spoke to public safety, economic development, and I can't remember what the third is. But if you connect that to James Foreman's book, which is Locking Up Our Own, he talks about, yes, the community wanted a court, prosecutor, and prison approach to public safety, but they also simultaneously wanted jobs, housing, and education. That part of the conversation gets lost or gets dropped because it's easier, quite frankly, it's lazy to focus on the criminal justice machine that already exists. It's harder to do the work to invest in housing and jobs and education, but that's happening. We're seeing that literally start this year, millions of dollars going into reentry. But we have to divorce ourselves from the desire to see this system continue to perpetuate itself. We don't want to just make the system nicer. We want to radically diminish this system only for the absolute most necessary reasons for it to exist.
And Robert, picking up where Keisha left off there, DC has done some of this in the past, right? We used to have Lorton, we used to have a prison. What are some of the things that we need to change when we do, presuming that we do have our own authority in the future? What are some of the things that you want to see us doing differently?
I really, really, really like the idea of Lorton. Even though Lorton didn't work out, I like the idea of just everything in comparison with the BOP. I like everything about Lorton. And one of the things that I would like to see different is like if we did build a a prison closer for us. I believe if we built it now, it would be, you know, a lot safer than Lawton. It would be more modern than Lawton. So I think that like one of the things that I like to see, you said, is like a more modernized like prison system for us. Like we could take some of the advice from, you know, the Bureau of Prisons as far as rebuilding them. And once we bring them here, then like someone mentioned blind spots earlier in the DC jail, we wouldn't have those things. So we wouldn't have so many lawsuits against it, and we wouldn't lose so much money. You know what I mean? And people wouldn't be so turned off behind, you know, us being here. It wouldn't be like a problem. You feel what I'm saying?
Thank you, Robert, for those closing words. We are going to wind up tonight. I don't see anything else in the Q&A. So thank you for everyone who attended this evening. This is the second out of 4 summer discussions this year. So keep an eye out for invitations for the future. We'll keep the conversation going.
Thank you,
Have a good night and
Emily.
stay
Thank
cool,
you for the
everyone.
discussion. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.